it would go, hey,
All right,
if you
ladies and gentlemen,
approach him, this
draw.
our stuff is never in the building when you're approaching.
Joe Joomla.
Hi guys.
Hey.
Welcome to my presentation on how we use the Abivia content pattern plugin in website development. My name is Alan Langford. My company is Abivia. And this is a tool that we use in almost every website we've built for the past several years. So let me just go through what we're going to talk about. First, which problems does ACP solve? What is a pattern? Content patterns doesn't make a lot of sense to a lot of people. I'm going to walk through some examples, and then I'm going to open for questions. So first, a quick bit about me. I'm not going to read my slide. I've been involved in Joomla for a fair while, open source for a fair bit longer than that, and I founded Abivia in 2005, and got a couple of plugins on the extensions directory, a couple of commercial ones. This one is free at the moment. So, the Abivia Content Pattern plugin is a plugin for content that separates data from presentation. Now, first I'll try to explain what a pattern is and then explain what that means. In a lot of cases we see these little templating systems. Peter's got a system, content templater, there's snippets, Rockets has got a thing where you can pull up a little macro and toss some stuff into it. Most of them take a template, you clone the content of that template into your article, you fill in whatever bits it is that you need to fill in, you save the article, and that's it, you're done. A pattern is different in that in the article you refer to a pattern and you specify parameters, variables that you want to pass into the pattern. So at the time the page is composed as a plugin, ACP sees this reference, it goes and fetches the pattern, which is another article, best done with a text editor rather than with a JavaScript editor. It pushes the variables that you've defined into that and composes a final article, so you can have multiple pattern references in the article, and then it pushes that out to the browser. So that's nice, but you might say, why do I care? So the original reason why ACP came around was because what you see is what you get. Editors have a habit of making unwanted changes. You lay something out, and it doesn't quite work out the way you want, and you get this. A lot of people say, I just do it in Dreamweaver and then paste it in. Well, this is wrong in a content management system. Something else that it fixes is you have a large number of articles with similar layouts. You have to maintain a bunch of articles with similar formats. So examples of this are product brochures where you have a main image, you have some titles, you've got a table of parameters or some kind of attributes, a little data sheet or something like that. You've got, when you have a site where you've got several hundred of these and you want to maintain a consistent layout, ACP is, for me, a great tool to do that with. Another thing that it fixes is clients who can't figure out how they want to lay out those product pages. Now, this has happened to me in almost every case. You do a wireframe about how you want these pages to look like, the client approves it, you mock up a couple of pages, the client approves it, you go back and you convert a database of a couple of hundred pages across, you let them go and do a user acceptance review, and they go, oh no, we don't like that. We think the borders on this need to be different, we think this needs to be over here, this needs to be over there. If you've got 100 separate articles, you're now going back and editing all of those articles to make those changes, all these mechanical changes. And lastly, once you've got layouts, you have customers who have control of their own content, and even though they've got the template, and they've got some rules, they tend to go, oh no, I want this picture needs to be bigger, or I figured out how to change this. They've got a little bit too much power to modify content. And then of course, your customer calls back and says, what the hell's going on with the site? And you have to say, well, really, it's your people who have control over it, but they're still not happy, and if they're not happy with the site, they're not happy with the person who's providing it. So, some of the advantages of patterns is, as I mentioned, they're applied during page composition. The changes to that pattern has instant effect. So when your client says, I'd rather have a blue background on my little spec table, you go into the pattern, you change the CSS for the blue background, you press save, client presses refresh, 100 articles are now represented with the change, and you're done. So you tend to look like a hero. A pattern is just another article, so there's no extra tables. This was actually we first wrote it back just when K2 was starting up. And one of the problems with K2 at the time was that there wasn't template support for all these other things. There wasn't, they have a different schema, different content tables, and that was a little too difficult for us. So the patterns are stored in another article, and one just references the other, and there's no schema changes, no incompatibility. This makes the transfer from 1.5 to 2.5 and then now to 3.0 relatively simple. There's a few minor changes, but ACP for 3.0 won't take long to release. Meanwhile, in the template, you're doing a one-time substitution. You're baked in. You have to go back and change every article if the client decides they want to change the layout. And the users can make changes that you probably don't want them to make. So why did I pick the word pattern? Template has got way too many uses. And there's templates for this, there's Joomla templates, there's these templates, there's those templates, there's all these other tools that use the word template. So I just decided that I'd try to find something that represented what it did, but not use the word template again. So a brief history of how we got here. We started out trying to fix a problem with the older version of TinyMC. If you have a list of 4 ordered items and your client pushes enter at the end of item 2 twice, it used to break into 2 separate lists. And mirroring those lists back together again typically required you to switch into HTML view, pull out the old tags, get everything sorted back out again. This is an immense frustration for end users. I had a client who was doing a lot of these, and the support calls just kept on coming through, and everybody was frustrated. So I wrote a plugin that did this. At the time, it was a template. Referenced this thing called an ordered list. You define a couple of items, and then in the body, I just went out and generated the list. Pretty straightforward. Worked for me. Made the client happy. They didn't mind doing a little bit of markup because it terminated lots of frustration. Since then, ACP has evolved a lot. It's now just released at version 2.0. It's got a bunch of programming language features so that you can get really complicated with it if you want to. It lets you do on-the-fly CSS injections. So if I go back to that example about having a little information block on the side and wanting to change it from blue to green, you can do that in the pattern. ACP injects the CSS for that pattern into the header in the right spot, so it's still compliant HTML. And if you reference the pattern 15 times on a page, it only injects it once. So it's about as clean and as efficient as you can get. We introduced format-specific patterns. This is a slightly obscure feature, but if you are doing things when somebody wants to pull something out as a RSS feed, you might not want to have that big image stuffed into the RSS feed. So you could reference another pattern that said, do this, just give me these things, give me these abstracts, give me a custom abstract. WordPress has a lot of those kinds of features, and you can kind of assemble them by hand using ACP. We also added access to the Joomla environment. I had a client who actually, this was a piece of custom development originally. He wanted to be able to get at structural information inside the article. He wanted to be able to know what side the section ID was for something, and he wanted to actually add a couple of fields to the content table for his specific application and then be able to reference them. So we added constructs to be able to do that. So a basic example of what ACP looks like now. Pretty much standard plug-in markup. We use the underscore command word to indicate the beginning of something and underscore n to indicate the end. There's a couple of ways to define variables. So this is the name is the simple, the name of the variable and then the value of the variable. We have for larger sections the open slash, close slash syntax that allows you to define a block of HTML. So if you're just dealing with a short piece of string, you use the short form. If you're dealing with something that's big, you use the extended form. This then would feed into a pattern that looked like the section on the right here. The ACP var inserts the value of the variable that you've defined on this side. The if allows you to say whether or not somebody's defined something. So in this case, if there was no title defined, the comma and the emphasis tag and the title would all not be generated, and it would just completely disappear. And so what we wind up in this case is an output that looks like this based on that input. Fairly straightforward. Our objective has always been to keep this as simple as possible from the content editor side, the person who's creating the content, to push the complexity into the pattern side. So, as I mentioned, there's ACP underscore command and then a set of parameters, typically optional, whatever's going on inside the call to the pattern, and then actually the command, and then an end marker. So there's 3 top-level commands: pattern, which you've already seen, globals, and with combined into something that's really powerful, and I'll get into that in a couple of slides. So the pattern reference looks like this. The ACP underscore pattern, which we've seen before. You can reference an article by an article alias, by a title, or by an ID number. In the plugin parameters, you can specify a category from which these things are supposed to be taken. So I usually create a category, a system ACP patterns someplace, refer to that, and then that keeps me control over my namespace. So if somebody else has an article with the same alias as one of our patterns, it doesn't cause any problems for where to find it. There are 3 ways to define a variable. We've already seen the variable name value. We've also already seen the slash, open slash, close slash. This third form with the actual ACP in front of it is there to escape name conflicts. If you were unfortunate enough to define a variable called YouTube, and then you went and installed a plugin that triggers off of YouTube, depending on which order it's running in, you might get the output from the YouTube plugin in the middle of a call to an ACP pattern, and ACP will just ignore it because the markup for ACP is gone. So by doing this, you specify that you're in the ACP namespace. It's rarely needed, but sometimes useful. And then we have lists and an open close, which basically creates an object structure. Probably you're saying arrays and objects. Really? This has turned out to be incredibly powerful. The example that I'll show is a business directory for a company where you have 1 or more offices. The office then has an address, maybe a main phone number, and then 1 or more people who work there, and they in turn have a name, a title, an email address, other things that may or may not appear. So we used list and open close instead of array and object because we're trying to not introduce programming terms to somebody whose job is just to maintain a site that's been delivered. So trying to take the programming terms away and put in something that's at least human understandable. The globals is just like a set of variable definitions that are accessible to all patterns inside an article. This is useful when you have you want to reference, say, a large number of images and you want them all in the same path. I actually use it to force users to put images in the right subdirectory so that you don't get content clutter when they go into Media Manager and create some other branch. You've created a branch where you want all the product images, and then they go off and create another one someplace else and start referring to it. And then when you're trying to do site maintenance, it's a mess. By encoding the path into the pattern, you can force them into the right place. But then if they have a subdirectory or something that they want to get to, you can allow them to specify that globally. And then all these image references are available. They have this variable available so that they can compose it into a path to the image. So now width is really, it turns out to be a lot more powerful than I expected. I created it to solve a specific problem, and it's turned out to be magic. Width allows you to select a set of articles, either by ID or by category, and then to say, take a pattern and apply that pattern to all the articles that you found based on those criteria, which is pretty simple. This is how it works in practice. You have a master article that says, this is the pattern I want to use, and I want to use it with some set of article selectors. ACP processes that, goes back out to the content table, grabs all the articles that match the selectors, pulls the values for the globals out, and applies those to the pattern, and then injects the result back into the main article. So I'll show you a good example of this coming up, but it allows you to do things that look like blog views with selected subsets of articles and do a whole bunch of other fun things. So ACP from the back end, from the developer side, you've probably seen it's got a fairly rich command set. The variable spaces, the var variable space is the default. It's just whatever the user defined in the article that's calling the pattern. The article is a reference into the article that's currently running, for lack of a better word. It allows you to get things like the article ID, a search engine friendly URL to that article, and anything else, the category IDs, anything else that you might want to work with. The request space pulls out information from the actual page request. So if there are parameters in the page request, whatever they happen to be, you can then access them, and you can do things based on some variation in the URL. The width space is like the article space, except it's for the article it's currently being included in a width command, and I'll show an example of that. We have conditionals. Our if condition is fairly limited at the moment. It's basically test for 1 or 0. If defined, whether or not the user actually defined the variable. If empty is useful when you're working inside an article if you want to test to see whether or not something is null. And if view is whether or not you're looking at an article view or a category view. So you can present different things depending on where Joomla is pushing that article out. We've got looping constructs, and as I mentioned, we've got the CSS injection and a bunch of other stuff that I could talk on for far too long. So here's an example of an investment bank that's got a bunch of case studies. And there are 4 sections defined in each case study of copy, and then there's a little block over on the side that has 4 or 5 actual pieces of information that need to be displayed. So the main article for this is an ACP width. Biz case is the pattern that we're going to be using, and we pull everything out of this category called business cases. So it says, go off and get me every article in this business case. One of these articles looks like this. We're defining global variables, all pretty straightforward. In the industry that we're in, what date the investment was made, how much, and a bunch of other details. We have these blocks of text that are going in to describe the details of stuff, and we have a status variable that you don't see defined here that's optional. So this is the pattern that generates that. And the things that are of interest in here are the conditional. If the status variable is defined, then the status tag gets generated into that little block that's over on the side. So you can have these things popping in, popping out, whether or not they happen to be defined. We have a reference to the article that's being included. So this is the actual title of the Joomla article, and we're just pulling it out and sticking it in as a header. And then we have an example of a case where the client made a change on us. There's 2 sets of business cases in this site. This one was originally called industry, and the other set, it was called type. We got through final review. They took it to their executives, and the executives said, no, we don't like this. There's a disconnect between the 2 sets of case studies. What are we going to do? They decided to call it sector. So we went back to each pattern, changed, in this case, industry to sector, press save, and the site is updated. So we also do this by generating the CSS. So this is the CSS for that pattern. It's all pretty straightforward. We're just adding in the background image and a couple of other things. But the ACP CSS, ACPN, is the thing that you use to bracket the injection of CSS. So another example. Oh, there we go, on the fly. So this is again useful if they decided they wanted the block on the other side of the page. You just go in, change the CSS, and off you go. So here's something actually, this is our extensions from our website. And all of these are actually extracted from the full article that describes the extension. So we've got this super table. And it's got these pieces in it. It's got a thumbnail image, title, these compatibility blocks, and a description of what's going on in the article. So what we have really is this one article. This is the same article as displayed as in article view. So we've really got one article, but we've got two ways to look at it. And the way we do this is by defining a global section, because we're including this in a with. We define the name of the extension internally so we can use it to compose a path. We have these flags that say what compatibility there is. We have a title that we use on the blog view, and actually a subtitle that we no longer use, the abstract for the front page, and then the rest of the stuff that's going on in the content. So the way we generate the thumbnail for the extension, we wrap it in a URL that goes back to the main article, and that's, if you've got search engine friendly turned on, that's an SEF URL that gets generated. And then we put in the name of the extension to get the path and point at the thumbnail. So the thumbnail is always called thumb.png, everything's consistent. And then we also generate the article title into the alt tag, so we've got good CSS for SEO. The blog itself, the actual the title block is just an if. If we've defined our own custom title, it puts in the title that we've defined, otherwise it goes back to the article and extracts it. So these are the two options that it would generate depending on whether or not we've defined the variable that basically overrides the use of the title. And at the same time, we've got it wrapped with a search engine friendly link. And this is something we didn't use in this article, but if we defined a variable called new, it would put up a little block that said new in bright green and bold. So you can turn this stuff on and off as you go. And last, we've got the version buttons. So if the variable for the version is defined, we include the button, and we always include the same markup, the same alt tag, the same hover text, so that you don't have to retype this all the time. We just say 2.51 and it's there. So ACP development and support, it's just released it before I flew down here. It's free at the moment. It'll probably stay free unless it really takes off and there's a lot of support requirements for it. If it starts to cost me a lot of money, then I'll have to generate some revenue from it from there. So it currently runs on 1.5 and 2.5. It shouldn't, because it's a plugin, it shouldn't take too much to push it across to 3.0. And ACP 1.9 has actually been used on production websites for well over a year now. You might have noticed in my bio that I started the unit testing initiative in Joomla. As a result, this is well unit tested. There's currently 53 unit tests that it has to pass in order to make it to a release. Whenever there's a bug, there's a new unit test, so we don't have regressions. And that's what I use to assure that I've got quality on my sites, and of course that moves on to anybody who's using it. There is documentation. There's an extensive but rather dry 29-page reference manual that's got some examples, but not a lot. There's some tutorial information, and there are web forums online where you can get any help if you try to use it. In the future, we're going to be adding more expressions, more capable expressions to the ifs, so we can test for more than just 1 and 0. We're going to make it so that we can inject less as well. So in the responsive side on 3, make it so that we can inject more than just straight CSS. We want to be able to have access to the template variables so that we can generate things that are consistent. Thinking about putting the patterns into XML just because it'll be quicker to parse. Not entirely sure about that. Adding new selectors to the with. Right now we've got articles and categories. We want to be able to do a couple of other things with ordering and perhaps going off and matching tags, things like that, so we can actually pull things based on a taxonomy. schemas for pattern data will enable us to actually do a graphical interface. So if we can start to have a pattern define what it is that it wants to see, then we can have an editor plugin that lets you click on a button and not have the user have to remember what variable names are or have a cheat sheet somewhere, but provide some kind of a richer UI where they get to fill in some fields. So that is it. Are there any questions? This is the possibly. Can you see the screen? Or?
I'm sorry, like
I've
they trained
lost
us when they
it.
said, "Does
Wait a
anybody have
second.
any questions?" I just like clicked the thing, just like they do.
No,
Sorry.
actually, you know what? It's me leaving the. It's me leaving.
Okay,
the
I was gonna say I didn't realize
presentation.
it cut it out. I thought that it kept showing and it just did the credits on the video thing. So I'm
It's-
sorry if that was mine.
No, I think it's me. Let me see if I can get this across to the other display.
Just one.
I'm going to be back in a minute.
All right.
Be right back.
That's gonna make it hard for me to answer.
Oh, there it
your
is.
question.
Okay. Yeah.
There we go. Well, since the guy I'm answering your question for isn't here
Well,
anymore.
this is an example of it in action.
Yes,
Okay.
let me show you the first the content article. And let me turn this across to. So the Contact Us page has got two pieces of stuff. It has this set of offices with contact information in it, and then it has a staff directory down here that's responsive. This is a responsive template. So for the offices, let's make this full screen. There we go. So we're referring to this pattern called offices, and we create a office object. We define the city as Toronto. We have a list of as many lines of address as you want, so list address, blah, blah, blah. And then for each contact method, we open a contact object. The label in this case is a phone number. In this case, we break up the area code and the phone number because we want to enforce their standard of having a format of an open bracket and a closed bracket around it. And then you close that off. So basically, we've got the contact, bunch of offices, 3 offices in total, all pretty much the same. And if I go back to the pattern that's creating that, small screens. So we're matching this pattern on alias. And make this bigger. Scroll back up so you can see this one. Maybe not. Hold on a second. Go away. All right. So there's a comment command that I usually use to keep track of what it is the pattern is expecting. Just just as a matter of notes. What we're doing in CSS is defining a set of classes that we use to cause each of those offices to represent as a block and then to float around responsively as the page gets bigger or smaller. Then we have a loop. We're looping through each office, so we've got 3 offices. That is we open a div for each office, so that's what's going to be bouncing around. Inside that, we put the office name up. We then go through another loop where we put all the address lines in, and then we those are just in order to keep the lines close together. We're just breaking them up with a break. So that's here. Yeah, right there. And then we end the loop, we close the div. Now this is something I didn't actually cover in the presentation. Where's the open for this? Right here. So this syntax here in the for where we do this open slash close slash allows you, how do I want to say this? If there's no items in the list, the open and close tags aren't generated. Right. So if you've got, and this starts with just about anything, so it automatically collapses if there's no data in there. You collapse it, not only collapse the items, but you collapse the stuff that's surrounding it. And then we go down into the actual loop for each of the contact pieces. Same thing, we open up a div if there is something there, and then we've got a span. We take the label here, and it's in a span which we then use to style the header text. And then the rest is slightly complicated to read, but basically if there's a telephone number defined, we create the open bracket, which is there, and then we put in the close bracket here, the non-breaking space, and then the actual phone number, and then we close that off, and then we close off the whole section with a clearing div so that it doesn't wrap around from there. So the back end.
The raw data for that is wrapped from where?
Okay, yeah, let me back up because you were out for that. So switch back to timing. What's this? So there's where the data is being defined. So can you read that?
I can, yeah.
Okay. So we're calling a pattern, which is what we were just looking at, called offices. We open an object for each office, and we define inside that the city. And then we have a list, which is just the lines of the address, so like lines of an address label. And then one or more, or actually 0 or more contact methods. So we define the label as phone. In this case, we broke the area code out into a separate variable to enforce the formatting of the open bracket and the closed bracket and the single space that was non-breaking, because that's the kind of formatting that you don't want to leave to an end user. The non-breaking space tends to confuse a lot of people. So this enforces the phone number and area code sitting on the same line with the closed bracket and space. Right? And that's the key to all of the things that we've done with ACP, is to maintain consistency on the final website without letting the user do stuff. The other one that we use in here is the actual staff directory that comes down below, and that's really straightforward. It's just define an office, define a series of people, define an office, define a series of people, and it punches it out into this kind of stuff. And the key part of this is that it's responding the way you want it to. And in fact, we've got on the case studies, if I go back up to the actual example I used in the presentation. So here, when it starts to collapse, there are actually media query CSS inside the pattern definition. So the CSS that's being generated by ACP is also responsive as well as the template. So, any other questions? Thank you.
Have you ever seen a product or project called Content One, which is by a Belgian company that?
No.
Yeah, they were trying to port it to Nuku. If you're familiar with that.
Yeah.
So they were one of the early supporters of that. Of course, that's kind of vaporized, you might say.
It's self-destructed.
And the notion was remarkable and similar in some respects. Not so much about formatting per se, which is I think their emphasis, but aggregation. The idea that in Joomla, a page is a page, and if you want more than a page, you put a module on, and a module can give you this or that. But you might have a much more grand scheme of wanting to pull data from lots of different places to assemble a page in this format, and then but no, you're someone who thinks from the other side of the pipe, and so you want to see another assembly of that information.
Right.
And it sounds like that you're in the ballpark for that.
This is actually closer to a unified content model. I don't know if you've heard any of the talks that
I haven't studied it, but yeah.
Yeah. So what I'm trying to do is keep the semantic information in the content table and isolate the presentation, because as we move into Joomla that supports UCP, all of that stuff that's currently buried in markup will wind up just being more data that's inside a specific content type.
Right.
And there will be ways to create it through some sort of a schema. So that'll actually, in the ideal world, ACP disappears by Joomla 4, and I'm on the architecture team for 4.
Good.
So, the idea is to continue to keep these sort of, this is layouts for content.
Yes.
Right? And somehow we're going to have to do that no matter what the underlying content model winds up looking like.
Yes.
So that's where it's going.
If you want to research this, you can look for a presentation. Maybe it was at a Nuku Jam, or it was a Joomla Day, Belgium, Netherlands. One of those, probably from about 2 years ago.
Okay.
And you'll identify the presenter, because I think right in the first couple minutes of his presentation, he put on I don't see a Ronald McDonald wig, but a multicolored,
Yeah.
For the first few minutes, he was doing some funny thing in his demo. When you see that,
you got the right guy.
You've got the right guy. Watch it. It's an hour-long presentation. I was mesmerized by it. The guy is very, very deep into what he was doing, but they developed in 1.5. They were never going to.
Right.
They couldn't just pick this up and move it through the migration, so they thought that Nuku was going to save them.
Yeah.
But that was.
Yeah, and it's the same problem that K2 had. It was kind of slow to get to 2.5 because the content model is sort of constantly evolving.
Right.
And when I first got into Joomla, I wanted to find ways to enhance the content model, but it was obvious that it wasn't going to be possible to do it. Like content is just buried too deeply.
Yeah.
We really do have to go 2 generations of the core code before we can succeed at that.
Yeah.
And more or less by accident, through this trying to fix the MCA editor's adjustments, I stumbled across this basically, and the more I used it, the more capability I added to it, and the more power it sort of acquired. It's a little esoteric, it's not something that works for end users, but on the pattern side it doesn't. But on the user side, actually I'll show you a site. These are actually the guys who caused the original, let's see, I think it's trucks, the original list implementation of ACP, but as they move farther in, they have these wonderfully big tables
Yes.
full of data, and they're now maintaining them on their own. But, which explains why I have to change the pattern. This, you basically go in, you reference the product pattern, and you define tires, and you define all of the variables that are in a tire. What the pattern does is it checks to see whether or not each of these categories is defined, and if it is, then it generates the table heads for them,
Yes.
and then it does the rest. And I got a complaint from the client that some of the users were finding it hard to read these tables, which at the time was true because there was no highlighting for the imperial versus metric. So it took me about 20 minutes to create a new class and flag the items that were being generated for imperial to have a slight gray background. And there are 600 products on this website. So it took me, 25 minutes or something like that, and the client was ecstatic. Right? It's the same thing in the prototyping. They still never really got it right, but they wanted to move these images all over the place. I don't agree with where they eventually put them, but this was a moving target. They changed it about 3 times, and basically the second time they changed it, I wrote ACP, so that the third time they changed it, I could do it quickly, and in fact they did, and that's how it goes. So that's it. It saved me 5 times the time that I put into writing it. And there isn't a single site that I've found it useful for. Anything from stupid little phone directories up to something that's complicated. So now I have to generate some more tutorial information. There's a learning curve. I find that of every 5 people I talk to about it, 1 person doesn't get it and never will. One person gets it immediately and thinks it's the best thing since sliced bread, and the rest need a couple of rounds of explanation.
Or a customer with a lot of data,
Yeah, exactly.
Formatting
Yeah.
issue, and then they'll say, "Oh, yeah, what was that?"
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But Joe's looked at it a couple of times, and he's a designer mentality kind of guy. So when it gets down to the programming kind of stuff, he just, this is a paradigm shift. He's trying to figure out how do I use this. He sees the sites that I do, and he goes, boy, that's cool. But getting the conceptual understanding of what you're doing is a little bit tricky, especially if you've come from a static site background where, you're building stuff in Dreamweaver and pasting it in. Right?
So now I could see us using this and having one of our developers use it to maintain a site and save a lot of time.
Yep.
I don't know of any of our clients that could have kept the stuff straight that you were showing me. I just really don't see them doing it. You'd be surprised at stupid stuff they come back with.
Actually, I've been surprised at the ones who pick it up. At Westlake, there's, their manager couldn't get it, and now basically their administrator does it, and she's perfect. She gets it right almost every time.
I guess, if you have it all set up and then you train them on it, that'd be one thing.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
But it just seems to me like what the story you just told about the client changing it and you being able to do the shading on thousands of lines and thousands of products or whatever at one time, that's pretty awesome. I mean, that right there is a reason for me to put this in the back of my head.
That's what it's all about.
And say at some point, I'm sure we'll need this, but at this point, I can't see. I know I wouldn't do it. I wouldn't maintain it, but I might give it to one of my PHP developers or my CSS guy or something and say, hey, you go learn this because I've got a product now or a project now that is going to need something.
And if the patterns are simple, like I have another site where it's basically a news site, and I've created a couple of patterns just to include images. Because I know that if I say include this image with this, using this pattern, I'm going to get those styles associated with that image. So I don't have to muck around with making sure that I've set the right class and I've done this and I've done that. So it's a lot easier for me to just go blah, blah, blah. And one of the other things I didn't cover is you can actually put an image in as the definition There are constructs in ACP that say, oh, if you see this HTML tag, extract the source from the image, and then use that the way you want to use it. So you can do some really developer things. But for this presentation, I didn't want to get deep into the developer stuff, or it'd just scare everybody, you know.
It
I'm
seems like
very
thi-
not developed.
This particular example might be pulled from using super table from a database. Is that not
No,
logical?
no, it would be logical
Yeah.
if they, the problem with that though is that really this is an application for a component, right? Like, if they had the budget for it, I would have done a component that just did this. There would be a
Yes.
product
Okay.
component
I'm with
in
you.
there, and you'd be able to just go in and define all of these things, and it
Right.
would just get generated out of
Yeah.
a layout. But
Yeah.
they wanted to pull stuff in and do things at the cheapest possible price, and then turned into guys who wanted to change their mind a lot. So,
Right.
Oh,
you know, and there are clients who are like that, you know. So what can you do?
Does this plugin work inside of like any of the e-commerce product pages? Like, could you stick it in a Hickashop page, or?
Well, there is, if they trigger the content plugin, like the on-article render, then yes.
Okay.
But at the same time, there's a hook where you can fire a trigger into it. So you can actually take some text and pass it into ACP, get the stuff back again. So you can do it, there's a manual entry point. So I had a video RSS feed component that was, you know, pulling that stuff out. It wasn't triggering the stuff, so, you know, my RSS